Okay, here is a sequence of comments by Max on Comments Dive 5. Okay, so he said, are you a direct or indirect realist or an idealist about perception, or perhaps something that transcends such distinctions? And I said, I don't think these terms are very helpful. They can be interpreted in various ways. In perception, concepts that have been induced from past experience are applied to current experience to construct mental representations, ideas. The ideas represent reality. They are not the same as what they represent. So I'm just gonna, as an aside, say that I don't understand the hang up people have with this. The thing out there that you're perceiving is not inside your head. So whatever's in your head is not the same as the thing out there. And anything you can think about it or know about it is in your head. So whatever you think about it or know about it, it isn't the thing itself, right? I don't get why this is so hard to understand, but it seems to be. It seems to really puzzle people to consider that when they perceive something, they're just perceiving it. It's just an idea of the thing, not the thing itself that they're experiencing. Anyway, okay, so I said, e.g., the idea of a coffee cup represents something that exists outside the brain. The idea represents the thing in a way that interprets sensory experience and can generate action. By the way, I'm kind of stuffed up for some reason, so I can barely breathe right now. The idea represents the thing in a way that interprets sensory experience and can generate action. The idea of the coffee cup is used by the brain to generate the action of reaching out and picking it up, for example. So right here I have a coffee cup, right? And for my brain to generate the action of reaching out, grabbing the handle, picking it up, it must have a model of that thing inside itself. That model is not the same as the thing itself. It's probably not like a scale model. It's probably not shaped like a coffee cup, a bunch of neurons in the form of a coffee cup firing or something like that. It's more like a correlation between an image and a muscular action and so on. It's a bunch of correlations that have to do with my sensory and motor neurons firing. So the model is not at all like the thing in itself. It's an information processing device, essentially. And anyway, let me just finish reading this. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here. Okay, so I said the concept of a coffee cup can be used to predict sensory data and generate motor data because it was induced from past sensory and motor data. If you've ever seen a child learning how to drink from a cup, you'll understand that it takes a long time for the child to learn all these little correlations. Like when they see the object, to sort of correlate what they see with the muscular action of reaching out and grabbing it. When they first start doing that, they knock it over, right? Kids knock cups over a lot. Adults have learned very precisely the relations between what they are experiencing visually and the right amount of muscular contractions and so on to correctly pick up the cup and not spill it, right? So we have all this knowledge from past interactions with cups stored in our brains, and that we bring that knowledge to bear on the current situation. I take that stored, my brain, not I consciously, my brain takes that stored concept and then applies it to this situation and then uses it to model this specific cup, right? So we have concepts that are general and we use them to model specific things. Okay, so we have past experience from which we induce concepts, then we apply them to current experience. All right, back to reading. I said perception is a relation between subject and object, mediated by ideas. I am aware of the coffee cup through the idea of the coffee cup. I act on the coffee cup through the idea of the cup. The brain has no direct access to the thing in itself. right? My brain doesn't leap out of my skull and like hover in the air around the coffee cup and, lick it or whatever, hug it. And the coffee cup doesn't, teleport into my brain or something like that. It is that my brain constructs a model based on what I am seeing and my knowledge of the world, specifically my knowledge of coffee cups and what I feel, right? I feel the cup right now. I'm holding it. I can feel it. I know what to expect, and so on. And you can trick people's perceptions, with trick cups or whatever. And you can see the startled reaction they have when their model doesn't predict what they experience. And suddenly they're like, what the frick is going on? Like you put a little hole in the cup or something, or whatever. There are all kinds of little tricks you can play on people, right? So they perceive something that isn't a good model. The model that their brain generates is not adequate for interacting with the object. So it's pretty clear that the thing in itself is not the model in the brain, because the model in the brain can be wrong. Something could look like a coffee cup but have a false bottom, or have all kinds of weird properties that would render that model insufficient for dealing with it, or just bad, right? It would be a bad model of that thing. Okay, anyway, I said the brain has no direct access to the thing in itself. It has indirect access via sensory and motor neurons, right? So if I have the idea, I want to take a sip of coffee, that generates a whole bunch of muscle twitches. I'm doing this right now. I'm lifting up the cup. I'm lifting it to my mouth. I drank some coffee, put the mug down. All of that required millions of different muscle twitches. And those muscle twitches had to be synchronized, and they had to depend on sensory input as well. So like the muscular tension in my arm has to depend on the weight of the mug, which I experience as tension in my muscles, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but like, let's say you think a mug is full, but it's empty, or it has just a little bit of fluid in it. So you go to pick it up, and you apply too much force to it because you expect a greater resistance. And so the movement becomes awkward. Or maybe you spilled a little bit in the cup or whatever. Okay. A kind of very unpleasant example of this is if you're walking down the stairs and you're not really paying attention and you think you're at the bottom, but you miss the last step and you kind of like flump down. Maybe you even fall on the ground. Right, it's that unpleasant experience caused by an incorrect model of the situation, generating the wrong muscle twitches, the wrong behavior. But anyway, to pick this up, my brain is coordinating muscle twitches, and it's using the input of my senses from my eyes and from the feeling of my muscles and the feeling of my hand and all that stuff to generate this action. Okay, so this is an important point. Perception and action are not really separated. They're part of the same flow because, like, your perception depends on your actions. If you look in one direction, you're going to perceive something different than if you look in another. When your eyes are closed, the visual field is basically null, and your brain knows that, like, in quotes, knows it. So it doesn't, like, if you close your eyes, you don't think the world has ceased to exist, right? When you blink, your brain just filters that out. Perception is an evolving model that is constructed from a combination of expectations and data. And the data are highly dependent on action, and so your brain is taking into account your actions when it updates the model. Right? So like where your eyes are looking, like a lot of what we do when we look at things is our eyes jump around, and by jumping around, we're measuring distances or relative distances. Okay. All right. Anyway, where was I? The concept of a coffee cup can be used to predict sensory data and generate motor data because it was induced from past sensory and motor data. It is an abstraction of past experience. Perception is a relation between subject and object mediated by ideas. I am aware of the coffee cup through the idea of the coffee cup. So it's not that I'm aware of the idea. This is another mistake people make. They get hung up on this. Well, if the idea is the only thing in your head, then the only thing you know is the idea. No, you know the thing in itself through the idea. There is a coffee cup here, and I know of it through an idea. That's what knowledge is. It's always mediated by representations, or at least that type of knowledge, representational knowledge, is mediated by representations. But that doesn't mean it's knowledge of itself. The idea of the coffee cup is knowledge of the thing in itself and how it relates to me, right? Like where it is, what I can do with it, how I can pick it up, put it down, what it looks like. So it's a relation between subject and object, and that relation takes place through the medium of ideas. I am aware of the coffee cup through the idea of the coffee cup. I act on the coffee cup through the idea of the coffee cup. The brain has no direct access to the thing in itself. It has indirect access via sensory and motor neurons. Ideas are used to interpret and generate sensory and motor data. I have the feeling I read part of that twice, but whatever. Anyway, then I said that's the gist of it. I guess you could call it representationalism. All right, then Max said, "Thank you for indulging me, ha ha. I see what your position is exactly, as it is familiar empiricist fare, and at that very Lockean." So I think, the thing people often try to do is just put me into a category rather than understanding what I'm saying. Rather than just trying to understand what I'm saying. Like I went to the trouble of explaining it, right? So rather than just saying, oh, okay, I understand what you're saying, he's like, oh, you're a Lockean, or you're a this or a that. I mean, I don't think this, I don't know, because I haven't read Locke, so who fucking knows, but I don't think he fully understands what I'm saying. So whether that's because he doesn't understand what I'm saying, or he doesn't understand what Locke's saying, I don't know. But instead of just trying to lump people into some category that you think you understand, just try to understand what they're saying. Okay, then he said, could I ask, though, if perception has the subject-object structure you suggest, which I agree it does in a sense, on what grounds do you suppose the subjective representation is not an accurate representation or description of its intentional object as it really is? So this is where it just becomes meaningless. But I'll get to that because I responded to that. He said, I think we are, epistemically speaking, prima facie justified in assuming, in the absence of countervailing reasons, that the subjective representation of the coffee mug is an accurate representation of some object outside that the idea describes, which is just the mug object. As the direct realist way of thinking goes, subjectivity is just awareness of an object. Wouldn't this be the simpler epistemic approach, rather than assuming subject and object as categorically different, and thus epistemically disconnected? Okay, so I said then, you don't seem to understand what I'm saying, or at least you're missing a crucial point. My idea of the coffee cup on my desk is accurate. So nowhere did I say it wasn't accurate. The question is, what is accuracy? Is accuracy a correspondence? Does it mean the coffee cup is inside my brain? Or some properties of the coffee cup are inside my brain? Or does it just mean that I have a model of the coffee cup which is adequate for generating action, with regards to that cup? Like I can pick it up, I can put it down, I can drink from it. That's the notion of accuracy that my model has. All right, I said it allows me to predict and control certain aspects of experience. That doesn't mean it is the coffee cup itself. The representation in my head is a way of processing information about the external object. An accurate map of a city isn't a city. It would be absurd to assume that a city is a map or a map is a city. A map does not contain all the information of a city. The form of a map depends on more than just the city. It also depends on the function of the map, e.g. the map has to fit in your pocket and contain only relevant information, etc. I realize there's a whole generation of people growing up who have never used a map. It's kind of funny. It was such a familiar thing in the past, and now it's almost become an anachronism. But yeah, the paper map that folds up and goes in your pocket or in your glove compartment, they used to call it. Anyway, I said the whole point is that truth is not a correspondence. The idea and the thing in itself are radically different. Reality is objective. Truth is subjective. If you want to discuss more, I'd rather do it in voice so we're not just talking past each other. But then I added to this, I said the crucial point you're missing is contained in the phrase an accurate representation or description of its intentional object as it really is. That phrase is totally missing the point. That's the crux. Think about what you were trying to say there. And he said, yes, I do think we are talking past each other in some crucial underlying respect. I do ultimately see what you are saying, and I agree partly, but really only in a second-order sense. In the second-order sense, I'm thinking you are right that I am committing a map for the terrain fallacy, because the human brain and its ideas are clearly cut off from the external world in itself. As far as the first-order nature of perception goes, the actual meta-nature of perception, that is, I reject the premise the idea and the thing in itself are radically different, and thus the categorical incompatibility of the subject and object. Well, in what way are they not radically different? I guess the question is, why do you reject that premise? Do you think a bunch of neurons firing is just the same as a coffee cup? How would you know that? All right, he said, as for correspondence theory, I do tend to side with it or something called that anyways, but as you say, it might require more precise parsing elsewhere in order to unpack what that entails exactly. All right, then I said, you have to think carefully about what it would mean to represent something as it really is. That's where you presuppose naive realism. How would you know if an idea represented the thing in itself as it really is? What does that even mean? You say that you reject the premise, not really a premise, that the idea and the thing in itself are radically different. Why would you reject that claim when it fits all the evidence and is the only way to make sense of perception, knowledge, thought, etc.? A map is radically different from a city. The idea of the coffee cup on my desk is in my brain, while the coffee cup is outside my brain. That's a radical difference. The coffee cup exists independent of the idea. The idea does not exist independent of the coffee cup. That's a radical difference. Right? If I go away and stop looking at the coffee cup will still exist, but my perception of it will cease to exist. They're radically different things. An idea can be accurate or inaccurate. The thing in itself cannot be accurate or inaccurate. That's another radical difference, etc. If you don't make this distinction, you can't understand anything about perception, knowledge, thought, and action. Then he said, do you have a Discord? Maybe talking would give me an opportunity to express myself with some competence. I don't think I've done so here, or at least I feel frustrated with how close I think we are to each other in our views, yet which my poor communication prevents satisfying closure. Then he said, I think naive and then in parentheses, direct realism comports with the actual nature of perception, which is why I presuppose it as you say. I think we should start there because getting the metaphysics right is important to understanding more complex human perception specifically, and the epistemic claims correspondence theorists usually make. For instance, do you believe that it is impossible for a subject in the abstract case to observe an object as it is in itself? Yes, of course, I believe I think it's absurd. I mean, it's just a meaningless question. Because what would that even mean? You can't even define what that means. So what would that even mean, right? I just think it's a meaningless question. Because perception is subjective. So it's like saying, can you make something that is intrinsically subjective objective? And the answer is no. Anyway, all right, he said, or are subjects necessarily only able to perceive representations? Well, I would never say that subjects perceive representations. They perceive objects through representations. Anyway, he said, only able to perceive representations and not objects themselves. So no, I would never say that. That's not at all what I'm saying. I don't know why people are hung up on this. It's like you see something through your eyes. Okay, this is like a metaphor, I guess you could use to think about it. Or you pick up a coffee cup with your hand. There's a medium through which you interact with the object. Okay? So when you see something with your eyes are involved. There's an image on your retina. But what you're seeing is the object, not the image on the retina. Okay? That's what seeing means. But in order to see, there must be the image on the retina. And the image on the retina is not the thing itself. Okay, is it easier to understand when it's an image on a retina rather than something in the brain? All right, anyway, then he said, this was sort of the line of questioning I initially launched, but I wasn't incisive enough to argue myself. I said the Discord link is in the video description. Okay, I'm going to end it there. As always, thanks for listening.